It's the last day of Planet Under Pressure, and what an amazing 4 days it's been. And this morning, news of a major breakthrough. It's being reported that the key science-based concept of planetary boundaries has now been put into the draft text of Rio+20. It's a fitting finale to 4 days of passionate discussion and earnest debate here by natural scientists and social scientists and economists and activists and businesses and politicians and policymakers, all dedicated to charting a sustainable future for planet Earth. A packed edition of the Daily Planet is coming up. We're talking consumption and communication. We'll explore what's needed for the world to adopt sustainable consumption patterns, and we'll tackle the very real problem of why scientists are actually so bad at communicating the amazing stuff they know. Something that's becoming really important when they know what's needed to make the world a better place. And we'll be finding out too about the extraordinary range of stuff related to Planet Under Pressure that's been going on around the world. Now, when I talked to Sir Bob Watson, the former NASA atmosphere scientist, who's now the scientific advisor to the UK's Environment Ministry at the beginning of this conference, he was absolutely adamant. If there's one thing that needs to be addressed, it's consumption. Consumption of products, of goods and services in all their myriad forms. Consumption within planetary boundaries. And as I said, it's being reported today that that key scientific concept of planetary boundaries is now in the draft text for Rio+20. This afternoon, a parallel session will explore new pathways for sustainable consumption and the challenges for scientists as they try to get to grips with the issue. The session's been convened by INPE, the Brazilian Institute for Space Research, and Myanna Lahsen from INPE is with me now. Myanna, is Bob Watson right? Is consumption the really big issue around changing human behaviour?
Absolutely. It is so central. There are two issues, population growth, consumption. Those two go together. And we've now been doing predictions. We have a lot of natural science predictions, projections, and fears, but how do you actually address these two key drivers of the problems? And so it's a real challenge for research to get into that and not just be doing the projections. What do we actually do about it? Where is the research in that?
What are the challenges then?
Well, it's amazing because consumption is so important, and we talk about energy consumption, but we're still seeking very much technological solutions, and that's part of it. But what about the behavioral aspects? You know, there's a tendency for institutions to say, well, we just need to change a little bit, but we're really talking about more, not just individuals starting to recycle more, but structural changes, and how do you do that? And that's where you need to have the social sciences more involved in this to say, what does this really mean? We keep talking about it, but what does it mean? And it's not just getting a new energy source, it's also changing food systems, which means changing values, changing what we want to eat because maybe we know more. So there's just so many dimensions of it, and it's amazing that not enough research has been done. Actually very little when you look at it.
The debate is so often characterized as crudely trying to persuade people in rich countries to consume less. And that comes with all sorts of huge political difficulties. But it's much more complex than that, isn't it?
Well, part of the problem is that we say these are political issues and we do science. And my point is we need to find these research questions that are as close to these political issues as possible. I'm a cultural anthropologist, so we study cultural, and culture is absolutely central to how people consume. It's not just driven by rational choice. People are socially embedded. They make the decisions because they're part of status systems. And all of that needs to be changed. How do we do that? Some people say, "Oh, we don't do social engineering. We're afraid of making certain interventions." But that fear needs to be considered in these discussions, but to figure out what kinds of research can actually make a difference. So we start internalizing the externalities, meaning really paying the price for the products, what we consume, but really changing how people consume. But that also means structural changes. It's not just we need to make more options, and that includes from the kind of meats. It's often hard to be a vegetarian, for example. How do we get better? It's much easier in the United States or in Europe than it is in Brazil, for example, where you have amazing soy You have so much soy, but it's not being produced in a way that's really attractive as an alternative to meat consumption. So meat consumption
because you've been working in Brazil. Is there any evidence come out of your work in Brazil that suggests some of these pathways, these way forward?
Well, I'm probing forward. Really what I've been doing is diagnosing the problem. If you look at media coverage, almost 800 articles in 2007, for example, 3 mentioned meat consumption as a problem. So there's lots of discussion about biofuels, but there's also economic interest along with biofuels, and we're behind it. So how do you approach something that's not socially attractive? So people like to have their barbecues. You have very strong economic interests that are behind the biofuels, or and the agricultural lobby is very strong in the government. So once we start getting into these things, like, ooh, that's politics, that's not what we do. But there is increasing recognition we need to deal with governance. But we need to get beyond just saying we need to study governance. We need to really get into what does all this mean. And it means bringing in other parts of the research community that are right now not so in this Earth system science community. We need to connect more.
Fascinating stuff. Myanna Lahsen from INPE in Brazil, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Daily Planet. Now, one of the huge issues confronting almost everyone at this meeting is how to communicate the message that we all need to change to a more sustainable way of living. Now, take climate change. Scientists bang on about tons of carbon dioxide, for example, but the truth is, for the rest of the world, it's meaningless. It's something they simply can't imagine. On the basis that a picture is worth 1,000 words, one company has come up with a new way of illustrating carbon emissions. The other day, I went to meet Nieman of Carbon Visualizations. What sort of people are interested in using this sort of visualization of CO2? Thank you very much.
Whenever you've got data that you want to bring to people, rather than people coming to the data with their own questions, we find that this kind of concrete visualization, concrete as opposed to abstract, where you can actually see stuff, is very effective. So when you're trying to introduce behavior change in an organization, for instance, showing people a graph perhaps doesn't bring about the same level of engagement as showing people the actual volume of carbon dioxide which they've saved that day.
There's another farming one you have here, which is livestock farms in the Peak District. Livestock, of course, is far more carbon intensive than arable farming. What did you learn from this, and what did the farmers learn by seeing this?
Well, what we saw from this is just that it gives us a sense of scale for the impact, which people can actually relate to physically. So relating it to the actual area of land, we find helps people sort of make sense of the numbers.
So all the red cubes coming in is all the CO2 building up from the farming activity?
That's right. Each one of those is a ton. So we're representing the farming activity as actually happening across this large area, bringing it together to one place so we can actually get a sense of scale. Here, we're seeing farming also involves sequestration. So carbon dioxide is taken out of the atmosphere by plants which are growing, and so we can represent that too in the same sort of way. So being able to show that also with graphics like this helps to reveal just the importance of land management, which otherwise it might be hidden. So bringing all of that carbon out of the earth and bringing it into one big cube can help you to just recognise the importance of the land.
That really does give you a sense, that huge cube there, of just what's involved in terms of land management, doesn't it? If you got the land management wrong, that CO2 would be released. It would dwarf the farming releases.
That's right, yes.
Well, with me now to discuss the difficulties of communicating science in ways that ordinary people can understand, and somebody who grapples with it every day. Asher Minns is the communications manager for the UK's Tyndall Centre that is in the forefront of climate science. Asher, welcome. I guess one of the big problems is that many of the ideas that you're trying to communicate around climate science are huge, they're massive ideas, they're global, and people, individuals, feel powerless, and so it means nothing to them. How do you overcome that?
I think there's very many different ways of communicating with people, and at scientific conferences like this we are wrestling with with the big issue, the big issue of climate change and environmental degradation, which is an important way of framing the problem, and I think environmental awareness is higher than it's ever been before. We know this from public opinion polls and lots of data. Politicians are talking about it. So while people are aware of the issue, exactly as you were saying, getting it down to the household level or the normal person in their workplace is a whole other scale of operation.
And scientists aren't actually very good at it, are they?
Yeah, and scientists are not as good at communicating as sometimes we would wish they were, but I think they're getting better, and I think they're learning, and I think conferences like this that bring policy and science together are one of the ways of actually improving scientists' knowledge of the policy world and how things work.
Is it a necessary requirement that that the sort of things that are being discussed here are very complex? Mm-hmm. There's lots of detail. In order to get a message through to a wider public, you need to simplify things down, which is something that scientists often find quite difficult to do.
You need to simplify things, but I think you also need to just communicate in a different way. So there's no point me sitting here talking about gigatons of carbon. What is a gigaton of carbon? We've looked at some visualisation, but what we do to engage with people in their homes and in their workplaces is more focus on people's values and beliefs and the things that matter to them, the things that are actually meaningful to you and me all of the time, every day. You know, the only thing we are not thinking about is environmental degradation. Scientists, most of the time, they are thinking about environmental degradation, and so they see it as a very central part of their work because they spend all that time thinking about it. For the rest of us, it's one of the many things that's in our everyday life.
And one of the other things that certainly I know from experience, I do a fair bit of media training, teaching people how to communicate. And one of the key things you always say to people is that it's emotion that gets things across. It's an emotional communication that sticks and that works. Scientists deal in facts. And they don't work so well, do they?
No, facts don't work so well. And again, I think that is to do with the communication of science, is that a scientist generally will think if you give people more facts, they immediately take them on board, and that means they make a change to their decisions or their behaviour. So exactly, it is about facts, but it's more about engaging with people in the things that are important to them. So taking it down to the household level, helping people be able to think about what they're doing in their when they're shopping, or the types of decisions they make about their travel, and also about people being aware of the process of science as well. I think this is something we tend to miss out a little bit, is we promote the result. Climate change is worse this year than we thought it was last year. That's a huge result. It makes a headline, but it doesn't empower anybody to do anything about that. And I think...
So I was going to say, so what are your top tips for scientists who are perhaps watching this programme, or the scientists at the conference here, on how better to communicate
my first tip always for anybody to communicate is to think about the audience. Who is it you are communicating to? If you're communicating to another bunch of scientists, fine, use the facts and the figures and the graphs and the data. But first of all, think about what it is that the people you're working with. If it's an audience of older people, then think about what climate change, if it's climate change, might mean to them. Think about how it might affect the place that they live or the places that they travel to. So try and make it a little bit familiar rather than remote, and also talk about what you do and how you do it, so that people have an understanding of the process of how you got that knowledge, but certainly making it more realistic to everybody's lives and where they live and the things they're interested in.
Asher Minns, that's great. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Now, how to measure human development? Well, there is the United Nations Development Programme's HDI, the Human Development Index, and it puts, of course, the usual suspects, the USA, Canada, Australia, at the top of the list. The HDI measures things like life expectancy, adult literacy, and purchasing power. But it doesn't measure what this conference is all about, sustainability. The Mongolian ecologist Chuluun Togtokh has a way of doing just that, though, with his new Human Sustainable Development Index. And it throws up some fascinating results. He's with me now. Welcome. What does the HSDI measure in addition to the things that the HDI measures?
This incorporates environmental index, and I started to change the name also. Maybe it's better to frame like sustainability index. And as in the environmental index, I'm including carbon dioxide emission per capita. Of course, less emission, better index, of course. And in terms of social index, I'm suggesting instead of this education and health index, education doesn't account now quality education. And instead of this, I am suggesting to include equity index based on Gini coefficient. And now then it becomes more holistic index with social equity and environmental index. And these three, when we integrate all these three indexes, it responds very nicely to three pillars of sustainability. And also, it actually tackles two main global risks, increasing greenhouse gases and income disparities. And another thing is actually it's cross skills. It's not only human index anymore. It's a human well-being and also societal resilience and also global.
Now, the sort of things that you're adding into your index, the social things, the environmental things, are they truly measurable nowadays? Can we now get a genuine and realistic measurement of these things that people will accept?
Well, it's a good question. This CO2 emission per capita is measured. Its data is available. Gini coefficient is, I'm right now proposing, but it's has to be it's measurable, but we have to work on it to measure in all countries.
And what happens if you start applying your new index to the world? How does it change the league table of the index? Does the USA, Canada, Australia still appear at the top of the list, or do other countries now come out better?
Oh, it will be like paradigm shift. For instance, we are if we will be measured this way, so we are going to measure like how growth is greener, how societies are equal. And interestingly, I already ranked all countries with this new index, sustainability index. And what is interesting is more equal societies like Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and interestingly also Japan are on the top of the list. And consumer societies go down, and this gives very interesting indication which way or how we should go in order to have paradigm shift.
Do you get any sense that the world is willing to embrace your new index?
I think we have to change, otherwise it's exactly, so we need to have this global change in order to respond to global environmental changes. And all scientists are achievements of sciences at this stage is we are near the threshold, near the tipping point, so we can have non-linear changes. It's so we were all talking about global warming effects, and these two indices are interestingly both systemic. So greenhouse gas emission is very systemic for all the, not only environmental issues and the human well-being and the global sustainability for the whole system. And our system is our commons. So it's also about governance issue.
Chuluun Togtokh, thank you very much for joining us. Fascinating topic. Let's hope it all works to you.
Thank you.
Now, if you've been watching the Daily Planet and the rest of the conference on the web because you couldn't get to London, there's a good chance you'll have been to one of the many related events that are being held around the world in science and technology centres and in museums. 150 members of the Worldwide Association of Science and Technology Centres have been putting on all sorts of events related to Planet Under Pressure and feeding back into the conference here in London over Twitter, Facebook, Skype and through the website. To catch up on what's been going on, I'm joined by Bryce Seidl, the chair of the ASTC, Robert Firmhofer, the director of the Copernicus Science Centre in Brussels, and Margit Fischer, the president of the Austrian Science Centre Network. Greetings to all of you. So what's been happening? What have you been up to elsewhere in the world apart from here at the conference centre in London?
Well, certainly the science centers around the world have rallied to this important gathering of scientists because our job in so many ways is to be storytellers and translators of current science and historic science, to get young people and old people excited and respectful about what science means to our lives. And so when there are big conferences like this, or Rio Plus 20, it galvanizes all of us to start to rethink about our responsibilities and our opportunities to knit people together globally to think about the impact of science and how exciting and wonderful it is, and at the same time how important it is.
How much thirst is there for science and sustainability in the world, particularly, I guess, amongst the young, who presumably make up a large part of your audience in these places?
I think young people and elderly people also want to know about what's going on. It affects their personal lives. They want to understand what's going on, and they want to understand how they can improve life and sustainability of this earth.
What sort of reaction have you had coming back from the centres as to what's been happening here at Planet Under Pressure? How have they responded?
Just one little correction. I'm also president of EXCITE, which is a European organization for science centres.
Forgive me, I
and museums. Well, I think it's extremely important that we find a good way to bridge the scientific world of research and the societal and the society. In fact, I don't think we do have a strong limit border between the two. Science is part of the society, but we are not just translating science to the society, we are also providing a platform for debate and discussion. As we all live in the democratic world, and that's up to the votes, what decisions will be taken by the decision makers. Therefore, this conference provides science centers with this opportunity not only to listen to the scientists, but also to be involved actively by tweeting, asking questions. And many events that are organized in the science centers in Europe and worldwide are also very much participative events. This is, I would stress the word engagement, empowerment and engagement.
And what form has that taken in these science centres? What has been happening in them? What sort of things have been happening?
Well, for example, today there's going to be a link up here between the conference and people at the Ontario Science Centre in Toronto, Canada. And there's another one also happening today where there's a very distinct link between the young people at a science center connecting up and engaging in conversations with scientists. But I think Robert's point is very key for science centers. We're very interested in helping address this issue of the relevance of science, and that means taking science in the context of our social and political structures. Not just taking science as an isolated, pure sort of a discipline that you learn and then go out into the world and figure out why it matters. I'm very encouraged by some of the comments we've heard here just today about the importance of the integration of the social sciences and the physical, natural sciences and the economics, because ultimately for science to be relevant to any individual's life, young or old, it has to fit in the context of the lives we live. I think science centers do a good job at that and really set young people up particularly to be able to understand why natural sciences are so valuable to society and how they can inform public policy.
Are science centres now truly global? Are they everywhere?
We hope so. And there are not enough science centers. And as you could see on the map, there are big empty places of this global world. And we should try to fill up with science centers. because you can discuss in a science center on a very memorable, enjoyable, experiencing way what science is about. And that is what our topic is on this conference, work that we want as to work together with the scientists to break down science so that average citizen can understand what's about.
And what difference do you think the science centres, the network of science centres, can make?
I think it's a huge difference, and that's the difference which is focusing on bridging the real impact on the society. We are to translate science to the society, but we are also to provide scientists with the feedback from the society. And I think it's almost equally important. That's why we use a lot of very participatory, engaging formats in order to bring all the stakeholders together to one table. And the stakeholders include, of course, the main audience of the science center, which are young people and families, but also teachers, but also politicians, non-governmental organizations, of course, researchers. And another difference is that we help to discover to the adults the curiosity in themselves, the curiosity for the world's phenomena. And that's something that is almost forgotten, that you stop asking questions about important things. So we provide children with the opportunity to find answers for their natural curiosity. And we provide adults with the opportunity to discover the childish curiosity in themselves again.
It is exactly that. It was what got me first interested in science all those years ago. Thank you all.
May I just add to that and to bring to the knowledge to the people that they have to unquestion the answer. There is no right answer which can be given. You have to unquestion every answer they get. And that is very important, not only for science and for sustainability, but also in politics.
That's a great final thought to think on, to unquestion the answer. I like that. Well, that's it. We've come to the end of this edition of the Daily Planet. I'm back in just over an hour, I beg your pardon, at 1 o'clock London time, with the very last Daily Planet, when we'll focus on the final outcomes of Planet Under Pressure and assess what's been achieved. But until then, goodbye.